just another story of the same. All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Baltimore Bureau Podcast. We are happy to be with you this week, this Labor Day weekend. Just want to start real quickly with a couple upcoming events we have here at the Real News Network. Coming up Thursday, September 27th, is the Future of Education Town Hall Part 2. The other event, and that's September 27th.
September 27th, 6 to 8.
Tuesday, September 25th, is Freedom Summer, Activating and Mobilizing Communities Then and Now, a cross-generational conversation with Eddie Conway, Charlie Cobb, and Christina Duncan Evans. The three of them will discuss the differences and the similarities of activism and mobilizing communities from 1964 to present day. Both of these events are free and open to the public here at the Real News Network in Baltimore. You can go online and check those out. One other event, just to save the date, October 17th is the Whole Bushel Live.
Come through, Whole Bushel.
So look out for announcements of performers on that. As always, I'm Easy Jackson here with Dharna Noor and Dr. Khalilah M. Harris, Esquire. And this morning we have a very special guest host. My good friend Ricarra Jones is in the building.
Come through. Fired up. Ready to go.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Ricarra is the Deputy Director of 1199 SEIU, Maryland, D.C., United Healthcare Workers East. I know that whole spiel because I am a former employee of that.
He's my partner in crime.
That's right. Me and Ricarra for about 10 years. It's like,
you were union thugs?
We was like frick or frack. We was like frick or frack. We got it in. So it's Labor Day weekend. So I think it's appropriate that Ricarra be here. You all are working on a lot of awesome stuff. You want to talk a little bit about what's going on with 1199 and SEIU?
Sure. So, I'm grateful I get to wake up every day and help people, working people build power. Through organized resources and organized people, we get to build power. So we're just coming off a very successful primary where we were able to get some really forward-thinking, progressive senators elected, knocked off some of the lieutenants of Mike Miller, who stood in the way of our $15 minimum wage.
Mike Miller's the Senate president.
Senate president, yes. Which is the number one priority for the union because there are so many folks that are living in poverty that are going to work every day, working 40 hours a week, and still aren't able to meet their basic needs, like, taking care of their kids. BG&E rates are going up. The water bills are crazy in the city of Baltimore. So we're just trying to, help to level the playing field for folks in the city who are working. And our other, big priority has been Jealous. We were one of the first organizations to endorse in the primary, and he ended up winning overwhelmingly. He was won over Rashawn Baker by 10 percentage points. So we're going to get him elected to the governor's mansion in November. So that's a huge priority of ours. And we're also going to do this weekend. We're really excited. This is one of our first times. We normally do labor in the pulpit, but this weekend we're going to do labor in the Bema. So we're going to have some of our workers going to synagogues and talking about how important the Fight for 15 is going to be, and just about everyday struggles and about how this is something that affects us all in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a rabbi over in Reservoir Hill. I forget his name. Is he a part of that? He's kind of a progressive rabbi.
Yeah, it might be because we're going to be at Beth Am.
Yeah.
And yes, that's where we're going to be at on Saturday. So we're going on tomorrow. So we're going to have one of our members speaking in there tomorrow. So we're very excited to be invited to speak there tomorrow.
Beth Am Synagogue does some amazing work when it comes to trying to bring people together and fight for what's right. So I really appreciate the programming that they do out of their synagogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're pretty awesome.
Speaking of Fight for 15, we had a town hall earlier this week, and something that resonated most with me while I was on the panel, I was moderating with Mark Steiner. We're going to check out a clip of that in a second. But Jim Strong from the Steelworkers Union says, when I was younger, minimum wage jobs were for teenagers. They weren't for everyday people to raise their families and put food on the table on. And when he said it, Mark also says something about, you don't need a minimum wage or a livable wage. You need a wage that you can live on.
Right.
And, just even the struggle that's happening to get to $15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which many people cannot live on.
No,
right?
nowhere in the state.
And the resistance
Yeah.
to just $15 is just so wild. And him saying that, it's like, you're right. You know, when you thought about minimum wage growing up, it was like, oh, that's, you know, because you work at a retail store or you're at a fast food restaurant, you might get minimum wage, but you live in your parents' house.
Yeah.
Or, but not that you're feeding your kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So-
No, that's absolutely the case today. That a lot of minimum wage earners are parents. They're not teenagers. They're raising families, and there is nowhere in the state today that you can actually live off of $15 an hour. So we're not even asking for something. We're asking for something that you need today, but in a few years. And it's just, I think the resistance, I still really don't understand it, because it's like we're all actually paying the cost for corporate welfare. So all the folks who work at Walmart and these big corporations who aren't paying livable wages, we're all picking up. We're all sharing that cost for folks that are got to go on public assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the whole discussion kind of exposes how much capitalism has taught us to devalue ourselves as the working class. You know what I mean? The argument that, well, you know, you need to just, you know, some people would say, well, you need to go find a better job, or you need to go to school, you need to get educated. And it's like, it's not that simple.
Yeah, and all that costs so much money.
It
that,
costs
like,
so much just to
who
do
can afford
that
to go to
stuff.
school on $15 an hour?
Right, and then one of the most staggering statistics to me was like, if minimum wage had been consistent with inflation, the minimum wage would be almost $20 right now.
Yeah, no,
I think more than 20.
Yeah, like about over $20. And I think the point that you made is very important, is because people think that this is all about like fast food workers, and it's not. It's across industries. There's security guards, there's janitors, there's teachers' aides, there's healthcare workers. These are all folks who are making minimum wage, and they have certifications. They've gone, to some school. So it's not just about folks who are working at McDonald's. These are people who are caring for our loved ones and providing quality care in some of these nursing homes and hospitals that are making minimum wage right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say folks like healthcare workers, because people throw this term around like low skill jobs, when really I think that low skill is like just the complete wrong way of putting it. Like oftentimes it's low certification jobs, but low skill, like, I mean, I don't think that I could just leave like my job at this news network right now and know how to be a caretaker. So I think it's important to lift up the amount of skill that those kinds of jobs actually do take.
So all you people out there with your good cushy jobs, don't forget that it's hard out here still for some people. You feel me?
For most people, unfortunately.
I wanted to make sure I shouted out. That's Rabbi Daniel Kotzenberg over at Bethlehem. But great work, Ricarra. You are doing an amazing job at 1199. I'm real proud of my former union.
Yeah, why don't we kick it to the video and talk a little bit more about what we saw?
Okay.
Our union was the first international union that addressed climate change. We were the first international union that formed a relationship with the Sierra Club on a national level to promote renewable energies, green jobs. Doesn't mean we agreed with everything that the Sierra Club, but we understood that we could form a coalition and go forward. The real issue when I'm going to throw some numbers at to you. In the fossil fuel sector, the average wage is around $35 per hour. Most of those jobs are unionized, which means they're going to have health care benefits, pensions, 401ks, paid vacations, sick leave, and so forth. The average wage in the renewable energy sector is $20 an hour. Most of those jobs are non-union. So that's really when we get into this debate moving forward on this issue, where it's sometimes with the environmental community, we kind of like butt heads, because $34 an hour versus 20 is a big difference. So that's something you need to remember, that we're talking about people's livelihoods, that if we shut down a coal power plant, which I understand the issue of coal, workers lose their jobs. A solar farm and a windmill doesn't really create a lot of jobs after the installation. You go out western Maryland, you'll see a lot of wind turbines but they only have maybe 15 to 20 full-time employees maintaining them, along with a solar farm. When I go to our district office in Kentucky, they got a huge solar farm with only a couple people there. So the jobs really is in the manufacturing of the components. That's where the real job creation is. And to really get away from this $15 an hour, if we really want to make the middle class come back again, we have to make those jobs union jobs. That's where the middle class. Plenty of studies out there that show as the middle class declined, who else declined with it? Union density. And that is where the real middle class will come back once we bring back make those jobs union jobs. Give workers the right to negotiate better wages and benefits.
Renard, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would love to. So I would like to also start there, but take it a little bit further back to the Sparrow's point. A little bit about me. My family's originally from East Baltimore, and I know a lot of people grew up in that area. And the thing about Sparrow's point and how I feel about where we move forward with manufacturing and jobs is that manufacturing is where it is not only now as far as green energy, but that was the driver for Baltimore history back in the day. And when we look at Baltimore having over 17,000 right now, empty vacant lots and homes, you have to look to Bethlehem Steel and these companies who are in Sparrow's Point because they employed 30,000 people at one point. So one would have to ask, is this where all these people disappeared from throughout that time up until 2012? So really when you look at it, manufacturing and jobs go hand in hand as far as our city is concerned because we've seen so many people disappear in that period. So I agree that manufacturing is the way out, but as far as the biggest issue for Sparrow's Point at the time, it wasn't more so just green energy or anything of that nature. It was the fact of innovation. They weren't innovating. Alternative options like plastic and aluminum and things of these nature were actually driving them out the market on top of the numbers of the U.S. market. They were driving themselves off the market too. So the question that you now have to ask yourself is, if they were not able to innovate, we need to start looking to innovative jobs, which solar promotes. Yes, solar farms don't give an opportunity to have a lot of employees, but that's why you want to have other options like making solar canopies. You want to be able to get into building infrastructure. You want to start finding different ways to drive that money down by community solar. There's a lot of more applications that we can get into with solar and green energy to be able to produce and keep more longevity jobs versus the steel industry back then and the other fossil fuel industries were banging their heads at the wall trying to continue to make the top dollar that they were, but they weren't innovating. And then you ended up finding other countries like China and India and other places get into the national market because of this. So solar now promotes an opportunity for us to be able to do that here and continue to create jobs because we have more than enough applications in front of us to be able to grow.
It was a great event. It was great to hear different perspectives.
Certainly.
Going back to Jim Strong, you know, he talked about the concept that you have all of these jobs. You know, the Steelworkers Union was one that really pushed early on into green jobs and the green economy. But when you think of when people say things just like, oh, solar farms or, you know, some of the renewable types of energy, there's not a real acknowledgement of having 1,000 steel workers in a plant versus 1,000 solar manufacturing employees who only build the windmills and then they don't have a job anymore. You don't need the same 1,000 people to maintain the solar farm. And so his position is, you know, we have to do both and. We need to talk about how to make sure those people who would be losing their jobs due to a new economy or a green economy will be able to work, but then also whatever jobs come that they need to be union jobs. Because you don't just wake up and say, although we can do this for $15 an hour or $10 an hour, I'm going to pay you $30 an hour. Those benefits, and I think to his point around the decrease in density of union employees has caused people to kind of forget history on what it took for people to have these jobs be actual jobs you can live on
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah.
livable wage.
Yeah.
And raise a family.
Raise a family, send kids to college, or let them live in your basement, whatever
Buy
you
a house.
decide. Buy
Buy
a house.
Right.
Build wealth.
Yeah.
Something that I thought was really interesting to hear from all of the folks on this panel, I'd love to hear from you too, Ricarra, is what compromises are too big? Like, at what point does a union say, this might be really good for the environment? Like, I think black liquor is a good example, but this might be really good for the environment, but we're going to lose too many jobs, or vice versa. When do environmentalists say, yeah, maybe we're going to lose some jobs, but we have to have that fight later. We can push for them to be, like, for these jobs to be better first. The most important thing right now is to clean up our climate and work for climate justice.
So I say, as an organization, we support the 50% renewable energy bill with a pathway to 100%. And I think there's, I think what Khalilah said is exactly correct. We aren't at a place where we have to say jobs or the our climate. We have to say both. Like, we can't. It's not either or at this point, and we have to find out a way that we can get these good paying jobs, and they have to be union jobs, and do local hiring. When if we do find a way to create like green jobs here. So I think we're at a place where we gotta do both, and there's no room to leave either.
Yeah. They're also kind of surprisingly talking about this event with some, I don't know, just like young people who I've spoken with. A lot of people's responses was like, aren't unions kind of irrelevant at this point? Like, with the Trump administration rolling back so many union protections, like, what is the point of even being in a union right now? What do you say to people who, I don't know, feel that way? I feel like at this point there are so many things working against unionization that
I say we got to build union power.
Yeah.
Like, we have to continue to build union power, because the point is that with unions comes power, and we get to sit at a table together, collective power, and say, like, this is what we deserve, and there should be dignity in work, and we should have good pay, we should have good benefits, we should be able to take a vacation and not lose money, we should be able to take time off when our kids are sick and not lose money, and we should be able to have health insurance that we're not paying so much for that we can't even utilize it. So, I mean, that's the importance of unions, and I think there is a true struggle. There is a divide. When we have some of our meetings, some of the folks that show up are older, and we have to have a real conversation about how we bring young workers back into the union and show them how important it is, and show them that when we stand together and we fight together, we can win together.
So from a different perspective, though, I think another challenge that unions have had is ways that some of them have either been obstructionist to addressing social change, or internally haven't done the work to address their own support for systems of inequity, at least in education. I know, 1199, you guys are rocking and rolling.
Exceptional.
We try to be on the forefront of social
So I don't expect you to speak on behalf of all unions, but I know that has been a challenge, and especially in some of the vitriolic and kind of talking heads going back and forth about education. You have people who are often at the extreme saying unions are the downfall of schools because they protect bad teachers, which is like, come on, sit down. But then on the other side,
we're not the FOP.
right? Well,
Oh, shots fired. Shots fired. Hey, Stephen, cue the gunshots.
somebody call an ambulance. Someone call 911.
But
but
no, I mean that was our challenge a lot when I was at 1199 too, was engaging young people, and I think in leadership all around the unions, and a lot of the ones that are kind of struggling, you notice that there's not there's no fresh leadership, you know what I mean, and it happens in everything. You have to you always got to bring the next generation in and really get, and it was a challenge for us getting into the shops and educating younger members on why unions were important, you know what I mean, and explaining, like, there was a time in our culture where you didn't come home from a job interview or getting a new job without your family asking you, is it union?
It a union?
You know
Right.
what I mean? It was that important to the health and security of the family. So
Ricarra, you were talking about some of the times that you have to fight for both environmental justice and like climate justice, and also for worker justice, and how those compromises can be made, how you can fight for both. I had this really interesting conversation with Mike Tidwell from Chesapeake Climate Action Network about the 50% bill that you were talking about, which will mandate that Maryland gets to 50% renewable energy by 2030. So why don't we take a look at that interview, and then we can chat about it a bit.
It's The Real News. I'm Dharna in Baltimore. There's a scientific consensus that the use of fossil fuels like gas and coal are causing climate change and pollution, and that we need to curb our use of these forms of energy to avoid catastrophic and irreversible consequences like mass species die-off and dangerous extreme weather. With the Trump administration rolling back environmental protections, many are looking to state governments to lead the fight. Here in Maryland, some environmental groups and the wind and solar industries are pushing the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which would mandate that 50% of the state's energy come from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. Joining me to talk about this is Mike Tidwell. Mike is the founder and the director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
So before we get into the specifics of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, could you just explain what exactly clean and renewable energy is and why it's important for Maryland to make this transition?
Well, clean renewable energy, we all know we need to solve climate change, which means that we need to move as fast as we can to especially wind and solar power. Solar power being rooftop solar or utility scale solar farms or land-based wind or offshore wind power. Those are the true clean renewable sources.
And how would transitioning to these forms of renewable energy impact everyday Marylanders? Maybe people who aren't familiar with environmental policy, but people who are just, Maryland citizens.
Well, first of all, it's going to be a huge source of jobs. It already is. There are more people working in the Maryland solar industry today than the crab industry. So a big driver of economic growth. And Maryland-based jobs, cleaner air, obviously, and God willing, if other states and other countries around the world move as fast as Maryland is moving, we can solve climate change, so it'll mean less sea level rise for Marylanders, less extreme storms like in Ellicott City flooding.
And what changes would the Clean Energy Jobs Act specifically require Maryland to make?
The Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act expands the state's renewable portfolio standard, just a fancy phrase for saying renewable energy standard. It expands it from the current law, which is 25% renewable energy by the year 2020, and it would double that to 50% renewable energy by the year 2030. It would also invest $27 million in job creation and business incubation for minority, veteran, and women-owned clean energy businesses. So it has an equity component. It's good for jobs. It will continue to lower the price for wind and solar power in the state and expand the volume.
So again, as you said, the policy that this act would change is the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is, again, the standard that determines what qualifies as renewable energy, how much renewable energy states have to use. And Food and Water Watch, another environmental organization, recently released this report that said Maryland's renewable energy policy, or the RPS, is problematic because it incentivizes the use of some forms of energy that are polluting or dirty and have negative health effects. I spoke with Patrick Woodall from Food and Water Watch about the report. Let's listen to a clip from that interview.
Maryland fell far short and was worse than the average in almost every case. So it's their target is 25%. The national average of the states we looked at was 30%. They have 5 dirties, and most states have 4 dirty energy sources. So, and Maryland has they count burning wood as clean energy. They count burning garbage and poultry litter as renewable energy. They count waste methane from landfills and factory farms as renewable. They count this paper milling byproduct called black liquor, burning that is renewable. And they also include these renewable energy credits, which we think are a bad component of these policies and should be phased out or eliminated for all the states that have them.
So let's unpack that a little bit. What's your response to some of these concerns that have been raised about Maryland's energy standards?
Well, unfortunately, Food and Water Watch's report does not describe, as I mentioned earlier, the 5,000 Maryland workers who are in the solar industry today. The fact that when I first put solar panels on my roof in Maryland in 2001, there were 5 companies that installed solar panels. Today, there are over 170 solar companies. There are 3 utility scale wind farms. There are 2 offshore wind farms coming to Maryland soon. And all of this, according to the wind and solar industries themselves, the companies that build wind and solar panels and turbines. All of this that I've just described is because of Maryland's renewable portfolio standard. In other words, this policy that Food and Water Watch basically says is really terrible has actually created an enormous amount of wind and solar power in the state. Food and Water Watch never mentions that. They don't mention the jobs. They don't mention the wind farms. They don't mention that the wind and solar industry support the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act, which would actually double the RPS. Food and Water Watch, unfortunately, only picks a few states, only picks the states with RPS policies. So they don't pick Georgia and Alabama and the states that don't even have standards. They pick the ones that do have standards. And Food and Water Watch set up a criteria that guaranteed that most states would fail. In other words, they said, well, which of these states with RPS policies have a goal of getting to 100% renewable energy? And unfortunately, only one state, Hawaii, has that standard. So all the other states get dinged. But the reality is those states that they give really bad grades to, and think about this, the states that got like a C, like California, an F, Massachusetts, a D+ for New York State. These are very liberal states that are moving aggressively on renewable energy. But according to Food and Water Watch, they're doing really, really badly. And they say Maryland got an F. Well, that's too bad, because the reality is no policy on energy is perfect. And do these policies have flaws? Of course they do. There are loopholes. But in Maryland, for example, the majority of the energy incentivized by our RPS is non-combustion energy. And by the year 2020, 80% of all the energy incentivized under our RPS policy will be wind and solar and other non-combustion energy. But if you read Food and Water Watch's report, you would think that the RPS is pro-pollution, anti-consumer, and ethically challenged. And people and groups that support this policy are also, pro-pollution, anti-consumer, and ethically challenged. It's really too bad. The thing that Food and Water Watch doesn't mention in their report is that the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act, a bill that's going to pass in 2019, has overwhelming support from legislators and nonprofit groups across the state, will in fact move the state further in the direction of wind and solar, such that by the year 2030, 94% of all of our renewable energy incentivized under this bill will be non-combustion energy, and we're going to create tens of thousands of jobs. Now, are there loopholes in the law? Yes, Food and Water Watch mentions them, and if you only read their report, you'd think that this policy only incentivizes dirty energy. The reality is those dirty energy sources are a minority of the policy, and they're getting smaller every year. And the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act will remove one of the worst loopholes, which is trash incineration, which is a problem in Baltimore, incentivizing, subsidizing trash incineration as renewable energy. It's wrong, it's unacceptable. The Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act removes that policy while moving the state toward 50% clean energy. There are other issues like and wood waste. Those are problems, but they're a small percentage of the total, and I think that those loopholes will be reformed as well. And the bottom line is we built a solid house for clean energy with it.
Those would be reformed also in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, or there's something that can be worked on later?
No. The biggest loophole that the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act removes is trash incineration. While again incentivizing wind and solar. Does it take care of all the loopholes? It does not. We intend to pass this bill in 2019, reforming the trash incineration loophole, and then come back in later years, in 1, 2, 3 years, and close all the other loopholes. Unfortunately, the United Steelworkers in Maryland, the AFL-CIO, nationally supports paper mills and black liquor. It's a very tough issue to remove that loophole, but the reality is that by the year 2050, if the Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act passes, even if you don't take black liquor out, it's going to be only about 2 or 3% of the total renewable portfolio.
It's interesting to see how many different perspectives there are on sort of the same issues, like this renewable portfolio standard, which is essentially like the standard that says what counts as sustainable energy, what counts as green energy, what places get like the money, the subsidy, like what kinds of energy get the money and the subsidies. And again, there's like another bill that's going to be considered for 100% renewable energy by 2035, and it seems like it doesn't have the same kind of support from unions. I don't know if you want to talk about why that is.
I mean, I think that we're just at a place where we want to make sure that there is a balance between good union jobs and protecting our environment. So we don't necessarily not support the 100% bill, but we are currently signed on to the 50% bill, and we just would like to find a balance. So that's kind of where we are as an organization.
Yes, watching this particular piece made me really see how complicated the issue is. You know what I mean? When Mike talks about all of the liberal states that have failed,
right,
that are getting failing grades on it, it's like, wow, you know, it's kind of remarkable to see that like there's still even that struggle in the leadership to try to get get renewable energy. And it's just, I mean, the amount of things that these corporations and companies have been able to get away with destroying the earth for profit.
I was going to say, what makes it complicated is it surfaces how everybody but the 1% is kind of fighting for scraps. Like, we have to find solutions for our own oppression in so many ways. And so to have to balance that, there are people today who need to eat and feed their kids. But if we do not move rapidly and aggressively to protect our environment,
it's those kids.
Those kids and those kids are going to be perpetually sick, dying earlier, not able to work because of whatever ailments they have or because the climate has just changed to a point where jobs that they could have had don't exist anymore.
Right. And it directly affects Baltimore. So we think about how the asthma rates in the city are like double what's happening nationally, and how our kids are missing school because, you know, of asthma rates. And as a healthcare organization, we see firsthand when these kids and their parents are coming into the emergency room or they're making calls about they can't go to school because asthma rates are so high. So I think it's something we definitely have to try to figure out and very soon. We don't have a lot of time. So.
Yeah, definitely. And there's new research even that shows that like air pollution is directly linked to higher rates of diabetes, which like all of these things are so compounded. Like if you already live in like a food swamp or a food desert where there's not a lot of healthy options, and then you're also experiencing air pollution, like it's I think maybe obvious at this point, but important to lift up that these like issues are always affecting like the most vulnerable. So
for sure. Let's get into this next one. We talked a little bit about the gubernatorial campaign here. Larry Hogan is our current Republican governor, and Jezl Noor asked him about his relationship with the Koch brothers. Is it Koch or Koch? I always get called on that. It's Koch, right? I thought so. I always like in my mind.
No, as a New Yorker, I always see it as Ed Koch.
That's right. Yeah, I'm always like, is it Koch or Koch?
Charles Koch.
So apparently the Koch brothers have he's definitely gotten money from them. He's tied to a board that is funded by them. And Jezl Noor asked him about it. Not only did he respond with a bold-faced lie, but he called
the real. You really feel.
Yeah, he called the real news fake news. How I feel?
Yeah.
I mean, he
bold-faced, and he lied.
He did what politicians do, like and it's pretty obvious. But he ends up adopting Trump's fake news lingo as his response to the real news. Let's check this out.
Before becoming the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan served on the board of the Maryland Public Policy Institute, a conservative think tank that opposes funding for public transit and sees Betsy DeVos's disastrous education reforms in Michigan as a model for Maryland. The Institute is part of a web of groups that opposes unions, worker protections, and environmental regulations that investigative reports have found are secretly backed by the Koch donor network. So I asked Hogan, who's doing well in the polls in a state Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1, if it's fair for him to call himself a moderate when he has ties to a group that pushes an extreme agenda, some of which he supports.
I know you build yourself as a moderate, you've distanced yourself from Donald Trump, but you're also a member of the Maryland Public Policy Institute, which is part of the State Policy Network, which is funded by the Koch brothers. Do you think you're really...
I'm not a member of it. I used to be on the board years ago, and the Koch brothers had absolutely nothing to do with it. So the real news is
president. You're president.
It's not true.
You're president.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the Koch brothers being associated with that. But I know all about your group, though.
You can hear me begin to say President Emeritus, but he's actually Director Emeritus of the Maryland Public Policy Institute, which has been called the policy arm of the Hogan administration. Hogan called my question fake news, but here's what we do know. The Institute wouldn't tell us who their donors are, but according to tax records obtained by Conservative Transparency, their leading donors through 2014, which covers the period Hogan served on their board, is Donors Capital Fund, which has been called the dark money ATM of the conservative movement. Another major funder is State Policy Network, who, according to a report by the Center for Media and Democracy, is funded by the Koch donor network. On top of that, an adjunct staffer at the Institute, Wendell Cox, is the former legislative director of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, another arm of the Koch network, which pushes corporate-friendly and anti-worker model legislation in state houses across the country. The Kochs gave the maximum amount to Hogan's 2018 campaign, and Politico reported their voter data contributed to his stunning 2014 victory. Liberals have their wealthy donors too. George Soros gave the maximum allowed donation to Hogan's opponent, but investigative journalists like Jane Mayer have chronicled the outsized influence the Kochs and their allies have on U.S. politics. And while Hogan decried my question as fake news, he hasn't opposed deceptively edited Republican Governor Association ads targeting his opponent, Ben Jealous.
Go ahead, call me a socialist.
If you keep playing the tape, Jealous was actually saying he's not a socialist.
Go ahead, call me a socialist. Doesn't change the fact I'm a venture capitalist.
I think it's entirely possible that you're right, Easy, that it is like he's completely lying. He has no idea that the Maryland Public Policy Institute has anything to do with the Koch brothers. But I was also thinking, like, maybe he actually doesn't know. Like, who knew that, like, all of these because it is so much more confusing when it's like, it's not Koch Industries, it's like all of these other groups with all these different names who are shadow groups for the same organization.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I just find it hard to believe. I mean, they gave. I think he said they maxed out on him in 2018. You know what I mean? So it's like, I just find it hard to believe that you didn't know. Right. I do believe that you think that because there's so many layers that you can get away
with saying
that bullshit.
Absolutely. And I think it just shows that he's much more like Trump than he tries to portray himself to be. Like saying fake news, you know, he has.
It was the first thing to roll off his tongue.
Yeah, absolutely, because you're so much like Trump. Like he's the president just froze the pay for the government workers. He also tried to do that when he first got into office.
But then he came out.
Yeah, because under pressure, right? And then you're going to say, oh, well, you should, this is bad policy, but you also tried to do that. So I just think it just shows example after example how, Hogan is so much like Trump and that we're living in that era.
I mean, but pulling up from Trump and Hogan, I think it's important for, I know it's important for us as Marylanders to get our heads out of our tails with the whole, I like this person and therefore they should hold office.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, come on. Like, what are the ramifications? We're talking about climate justice and implications for our kids and our grandkids, but you understand putting this person in office and perhaps putting him in office, because I have to say, a lot of the ads that I hear in Baltimore are actually for Boyd Rutherford. Yeah. It's like, not only are we going to elect Larry Hogan, but you should know that the first black governor will be a Republican in Maryland, the blue, one of the bluest states, supposedly. So you have to ask people, what is it? You are so unwilling to really look at someone's credentials because you like them, and are willing to say, I don't like what the other guy's doing. So in this piece, you have Jessel talking to someone sharing a policy that the person really likes, and he goes, oh, but that's Ben Jealous's policy.
Exactly. Right.
And the person's Democrats for Hogan, like, como se dice? Ben Jealous.
But that's also, he's been taking credit for stuff that Democrats have been passing. 100%. Like, he has nothing to do with that. They
the education trust.
Exactly. You're taking credit for all of that
stuff. That was
not you. You didn't help at all. Mm-hmm. So, and I think part of it is that we have to bring this conversation back to the issues, right? Yep. So it's easy for Republicans and the opposition to steal our messaging, but when we talk about the issues, we always win. When we talk about education and public safety and immigration and all of the things that we care about in economics, we always win. So we just have to constantly bring that conversation back and talk about real issues that affect working people in the state of Maryland.
And I think that strategy is so important because politics have gotten away with for so long just playing on emotion and just sound clips. I love that Jessel points out, the sound clip of them saying with Ben Jealous going, call me a socialist.
Call me a socialist, but I'm a venture capitalist.
Take that, but I'm a venture capitalist.
But I'm not.
It's not even the next sentence. It's the same sentence. You know what I mean?
But I think we're seeing this wave where progressives are winning, right? So we see it in Florida, we're seeing it in Georgia, we're going to see it here in Maryland, and that if we continue to talk to our base and we continue to energize our base, we will win. But when we do this, when we change our strategy and we want to do this moderate thing and walk down the center line, we lose our base and they don't turn out.
What I will also say about Florida, Georgia, and Maryland, when we win in all three, is Black folk need to stop pretending like somebody is going to come and save us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And every time, every turn, when we decide, you know what, we're not waiting on anybody, we get results. And for too long, people have used the term progressive as analogous with I'm for racial justice and I'm for people who are without being able to live their best lives by rooting out the causes of their poverty as opposed to doing surface level fixes, right? Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that's not the case.
Yeah, like you said, nobody gets a pass, even people who build themselves as progressives. Like, you can fly your progressive flag and say that you got the support of whoever your Bernie Sanders is or whatever, but that doesn't mean that we should not be still pushing you on the policies that we actually want you to support.
And holding folks accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. No matter who you are.
And that's one thing I think 1199 has always been good at is, when one of my favorite moments was when Donna Edwards, who was the first Black Congresswoman to represent Prince George's County in Congress, and Al Wynn, who had her seat before that, was a longtime union friend. You know what I mean? And then we found out that he was taking money from insurance companies and taking these lavish trips, and he was coming and making all these promises to our members and then not actually following through on them. And that was the first time I saw us really get somebody out of there, you know what I mean? We had the Black Caucus was mad at us.
Oh yeah,
I recall.
You know what I mean?
And mad at her,
but then at the same
tenure.
time, Donna Edwards got in there, and even she didn't come through on some of the promises that she made. So we used to, John Reed used to always say we have a permanent interest, not permanent friends.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think every single voter needs to learn how to carry it like that. You know what I mean? No matter how charismatic somebody is, no matter how, people always joke about the fact that D.C. loved, what's the mayor that got caught with crack?
Marion Barry.
Marion Barry.
Yeah, people joke about the fact that D.C. loved Marion Barry, but when I canvassed that district,
he did real things,
and people
100%.
had real stories.
People had,
you know what I mean?
They have tangible things.
Housing.
Yeah.
He did a lot of stuff for the actual community. It wasn't just because we like him.
Yeah, one lady literally was crying. Was my son is doing well in life because Marion Barry, got him a job, got him in school. He left D.C., got it from around his neighborhood. These little stories, people are able to say, all right, and that's, I think, what voters need. We need to be able to hold them accountable and say, what did you do? What did you do?
Right.
When using Marion Barry as an example, I think a challenge we have, particularly in the Black community, is we sometimes hold people more accountable than we hold people who have their thumbs on the scale, right, from our own community.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we have people in our community who are thriving on the backs of our suffering.
Yeah.
And it's but we love them. They've been in office for 42 years, yes, but, we haven't seen the results of anything, but they come around.
Yeah.
They're nice. No, tell me what policy it is.
I don't think we saw a lot of that in the primary. We got a lot of backlash for these people are in leadership. And and I'm well, what
they
is
should keep their feet because they're in leadership
brought to our communities? Where's the resources? What can we say that they're sitting in this seat? What has it brought to us? What has it done for us? So just because a person's been in leadership and they've been sitting there for a long time before I was born, doesn't mean that they're actually bringing real resources to our community. And I just want to point on one thing that you said before is that everybody keeps talking about nationally this blue wave, and like it's just going to magically come.
Yeah.
But this blue wave is not going to come unless we create it, right? So we all have to kind of get out here and do this work to get this blue wave to be reality, and for folks to actually show up and turn out.
Yeah, I do think that can work against us too a bit, because if you keep hearing on television and the radio, there's a blue wave coming, like, oh, look,
I'm going to sit home tonight. The wave got it. The wave coming.
And also, like, again,
I'll be here when you get here.
Exactly.
But also, like, what shade of blue? Like, even again, like when if that blue wave does come and we all do nothing, like, you know, okay, fine, you have a Democrat in power. Look at all of the Democrats we have in power, and like this city, this state, still need to be held accountable.
Yeah,
like,
people have great PR campaigns going for them, so that they can be elected. But ask about what their policies are, what they've done thus far in office, and it's like they showed up to the summit. They showed up to Artscape, and didn't you see the nice pictures that came out in their briefing?
Yeah,
it's like.
Even when you think about the folks like in Annapolis, we have the majority of leadership in Annapolis is Democrat, and it took 5 years to pass earned sick leave.
Yeah,
that's ridiculous,
it's ridiculous,
right? So it's just like, just being a Democrat is not, it's not enough.
And just saying you're progressive doesn't make you progressive, because who are you seeking progress for? Yourself to get reelected so you can make promises, or for the community?
And earned sick leave isn't the only one. Like, gay marriage, they were slow on. They're still slow on legalization of marijuana. You know, so many of these issues, these, you know, Democrats are just like having a hard time.
It was Democrats who helped pass that tough on crime bill just last session.
Right.
But also just the resonance I hear from people when they are celebrating the concept of taxes not having been raised. It's like, let's push a pin in this right here. You're telling me you think that the wealthiest among us can't pay any more in taxes.
But that'll be me one day, so.
It's an American lie, you know?
It is. And taxes equal services. So when you don't have taxes, you don't have services. So it's this thing that we're not going to raise taxes means you're also not going to get services.
Yeah, tell me how much you'll save in
But that's, again, playing to people's emotions. The first thing they think is, I'm paying money out of my pocket. But it's like, no, this is money to keep infrastructure. This is money that funds, you know, things that keep our communities healthy, our well-being.
Although, I will say, I would be nervous about a candidate who's not able to play to somebody's emotions, too, just because of the way that it for instance, I think that a lot of people have been like not as inspired by the Jealous campaign, just because he hasn't been doing as much of the groundwork in some cases as people would expect. I've heard this from a number of people.
He's not kissing the babies.
Well, yeah, and maybe that's like, and maybe it's like bullshit that people should have to do that in the first place. But you do need to still in this day and age have the public speaking skills and the door knocking and the signs on your website and everything. So
especially in a city like Baltimore. Baltimore's a big we gotta know you.
Right. I want to see you. I want to sit down. I want to shake your hand. I want to.
Yeah. All right, let's get into this other story we got. I'm excited about this one. This is your story, Khalilah. Will new school buildings mean better educational outcomes for Baltimore students? Ribbon cuttings for 5 new Baltimore City schools. I got a chance to see the Forest Park one.
I did too.
I'm a West Baltimore boy, so that made me very happy. And, you know, for folks who don't know, we've had a serious struggle in Baltimore with Baltimore City schools. We had schools closing. We had schools underfunded. So let's get into this one and check this out.
I'm Khalilah Harris for the Real News Network at Cherry Hill Elementary Middle School at the opening of this new 21st century school building.
I am Sonia Santelises. I'm CEO of City Schools. I, along with Claude, want to welcome you all here today, members of the Anne Arundel community, members of the Cherry Hill community, elected officials. There are so many people here who just have played such an amazing role in what we see here now.
Back to school season in Baltimore. The $1 billion 21st Century Schools Fund is supporting the opening of 5 new city schools in this school year and the renovation or rebuilding of 23 others. This effort came in response to years of protest, advocacy, and collaboration between the grassroots and city and elected officials with the Transform Baltimore campaign.
This school and the other ones being open this week are really the culmination of so many people's work and dreams over the last 8 or so years. We started a campaign to try to replace all the decrepit unacceptable school buildings in Baltimore City, and now we're seeing the fruits of everyone's labor.
The old Arundel Elementary Middle School will find new life as the Baltimore Early Learning Academy and will provide an early childhood center spanning birth through second grade. Just steps away, the renovated Cherry Hill Elementary Middle School will serve grades 3 through 8. This innovation in grade structures was demanded by community members and cannot be found anywhere else in the city.
One of the things that the mayor and I were talking about before the ceremony was we have kindergartners that will be going to Anne Arundel who will graduate from Cherry Hill with this as the norm. They're not going to know that there was an other, right? That was less than. They're going to walk through their learning experience knowing that this is what it should look like.
Many residents of all ages attended the events, expressing their reflection on what once was and what is now possible for the new building.
It's really good for other kids because I used to go to school here and I seen how we ain't really have enough space for our wrestling programs and our gym. It was all in one area. The gymnasium, everything was together, but now it's more space, more kids to come. We got better staffs. Everybody can help out now. It's better than it was a few years back when I was here. I think it's really good for them because, a lot of kids these days, they're not really into school. But when you do stuff like this for the kids, it help them out and they want to learn more. They seeing better things in their area and that make them want to work harder.
Well, it's important to me because I started here from kindergarten and I finished the 6th grade here. And it's a part of history for me.
It's important for me because the children now that are going to be our future. And we want to make sure that they get a quality education, not only a quality education, but a building that is safe and at state of the arts.
Yeah, and I also went to school here. It was a wonderful school when I was here, but that was a long time ago. So it needs some refreshing to keep up with new learning and new experiences.
The parents in attendance were also very clear about what this opportunity could mean for their students and their community.
Well, I'm looking for the opportunity for the kids to learn. They have a good school year, progress in life, and grow up, be something in life. Because it's hard out here for black kids in the city. Just be good for them. Brand new school, fresh start for them.
While expressing their excitement, there was a consistent acknowledgement that all students, families, and educators in this community and across the city deserve spaces that show an investment in them.
I think the energy is really that it is possible to deliver on our promise to our young people, right? This building proves that when the community mobilizes, when all of the adults get together and do what we know is right, whether it's elected officials, local advocates, school system officials, we really can get something amazing done for kids. And that's what's so energizing about this whole thing.
I still feel a little bit overwhelmed because I'm just so blown away by this day. It's 8 years of work and fighting at every corner to get what kids deserve. This is, at the end of the day, I'm inspired by this because it truly reflects what kids deserve. This is what a school should look like for all kids.
I'm very excited, overwhelmed. I think it's a great opportunity for kids in this community to know that people care about them. People care about how they learn, where they learn, and what they learn.
First of all, the kids that were there, the energy from the young people.
Yeah.
They were like, this is mine. Look at it. We laced out in here. Oh, can we go in there? Can we? And when people were responding like, go ahead in there, go look around. And it's like, I can touch it. Go ahead in there. It's for you. You deserve it. Yeah. And that's the predominant theme you heard across every comment from the CEO to, the baby that I interviewed towards the tail end. Mm-hmm. They deserve it. And it doesn't actually have to be connected to some educational outcome. The question is it good enough for your child?
Right.
Therefore, our children should have it, right? And I say that pointing at you, pointing at me, right? Mm-hmm. If it's okay for my child, then it needs to be okay for your child, and we're going to fight for it. And I've been, being in there was also a little surreal because I was at the very front of the Transform Baltimore campaign while I was running a school. Our kids were marching. Our kids were in Annapolis. Demanding both that at that time, before they jumped on board, the CEO of the school district wasn't quite down yet, Andres Alonso, and Stephanie Rawlings Blake, the mayor at the time, wasn't quite down yet. Right. And again, as people will take your narrative, you know, it's like the mayor got casino money for the schools, and Andres Alonso is 100% behind prioritizing right now renovating school facilities. And that was not the case. This came from the grassroots rising up and saying, this is not okay for our kids. You know, at a bare minimum, some of these buildings are places we would not work in on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
So, and then here we have 20 some odd schools that are going to be or have already been renovated, but the entire school district's portfolio is problematic. But then you have to also look at the layers of where schools close, right? And it's not as simple as there's under enrollment. Okay, what disinvestment happened in that community to cause under enrollment in that school, so you can then close the school, then surplus the school, have the school be used by a developer to create a new community, not for the people who were living there, but for the people
you're trying to attract.
And so, you know, those conversations weren't necessarily at the front end of it. And you see BB talking about, 24 to 48 schools are great, but we need to get many more done. But we need to be thoughtful about how communities are being selected for schools closing, because school closures is an assault on children and communities. People love their schools, even if no results are coming out of the building. You know, people feel a connection in their community.
I remember, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to spend my last year and a half of high school in Columbia, Maryland at Wild Lake High School, because it was a real culture shift. Right, I had spent my whole life in city schools, and I had been accustomed to little morale things like, you become accustomed to your bathroom smelling like piss. You know what I mean? You become accustomed to doors off the stalls. You become accustomed to graffiti on the walls. You
windows bolted shut,
windows broken, no doors on it, no heat in the classroom. You become accustomed to terrible food in the cafeteria. And then I like, my mother moved us out to Columbia, and I walk into Wild Lake, and I'm like, yo, this school looks like a shopping
palace,
mall. You know what I mean? And my grades literally went from C and D student to A and B student. You know what I mean? Like, and I attribute that to the environment. You know what I mean? Like, it felt good to be in school. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think about it's just like a new car, right? Is my new car going to get me to Towson faster than my old car? No. But is it going to feel better? Is it going to look better? Am I going to take IG pictures? So I just think it's all about that. It's all about the attitude. And like when I went to Forest Park, I got there at the very end. I took my daughter, who's only 6, who's in the first grade. She's like, well, why are we going to a high school? Because I was like, I want you to see it. And she's like, well, I'm in the first grade. I got a long way to go. But when we left, she was like, I want to go there. Like, this is nice. You know, she saw the renovated pool and the community center. And the
pool is beautiful.
I was like, can I get in and swim? But it just makes you want to get up every day and go to school. And maybe I might want to come and volunteer in this building because, you know, it's a nice building. So I think that just for the community, I live in that neighborhood. So to have a new school that we can ride past and see the students going into and they want to be there, I think it just helps the community in overall.
And it sends a message. Are you valuable? Is this your city? Do you have a right to the city? Because right now, so many other buildings say no.
I mean, and it's like, and then you say, you know, you have people out in the suburbs talking about Baltimore City students, and they're calling them animals, and they're calling them, well, you know, you may want to look a little deeper. They're spending 8 hours a day in cages, basically. You know what I mean? They're spending 8 hours a day and insufficient. I can't remember the name of the school, but there's an elementary school that I went into teach a hip hop class, and there's no windows on the classrooms. You know what I mean? Like no windows on the classroom, no doors, you know, and it's just like, how do you expect them to thrive in this kind of environment? So,
and not only the students though, but the teachers too. Like, how can we attract quality, qualified teachers to our schools when the buildings are falling apart?
But you said it right the first time, quality, right? There are lots of people who, according to rules and policies, are qualified according to the paperwork, but are they quality for the children?
Do they actually care about taking the time to interact with the kids?
Well, other than that, do they have more than 6 weeks of training?
Sure,
sure.
So
there's that. But, those people are deemed qualified from the time they walk in the door as well, according to the policies.
Yeah.
So the question really is, are we saying to even the kids in the community, you should teach here?
Right.
And we're going to send you off to college, but you come teach here because this is the type of environment that we valued for you, and you would be an asset to make this environment just as strong for other children.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really sticks out to me in this is we forget what it takes to be a good teacher. One of my friends, she's a teacher, and she changes when school year starts.
Yeah.
Her routine, her diet, everything changes. And I was talking to her about it the other day, and she said, I love my Baltimore City school students, and they deserve me coming in at my best.
At 100%.
You know what I'm saying? And that really hit me, because it was like, how many of us work jobs where we just do whatever when we off,
we phone
and we
it
just show up and we phone it in, you know what I mean? And, but we don't prepare, you have to, and you have teachers out there who literally, like, their life changes and revolves around educating these students, because without teachers, you don't have any other professions.
And you think about educating, but it's more than that. Like, some of these teachers are their family. Like, when they, they're making sure they're fed, they're giving them an extra book bag. So they're doing a lot more than that. And I'll just say that it's also important for me that my child's teacher looks like my child, right? So it's not going to be all the time, but I want my daughter to grow up in classrooms and see, like, you know what, maybe I can be a teacher one day because the person that's educating me looks like me.
Dr. Andre Bunley, back in the day, he was the principal at Walbrook, and I had custody of my younger brother at one point, and he was 17. I took him to get him enrolled there, and Dr. Bunley, as a black man, would walk through the halls and talk to the young male students, and I and specifically about male stuff. You know what I mean? He would be explaining, like, you think you're a man? Let me tell you what a real man is. And he would explain, like, this is what I had to do this today. Now, would you trade shoes with me? All right, now get your butt back in class. You know what I mean? And that kind of thing for my brother and I to see was, that was inspiration. My brother wanted to go to school. You know what I mean? He had funny things to come back home and say that Dr. Bunley said to him. You know what I mean? Those things, I think, are extremely important, especially for black children, especially when you look at a society that, is constantly telling us to listen to and follow what white people say. You know what I mean?
White is right.
White is right. You know what I mean? And just assuming that, a white man in front of you has all of the answers. That starts for a lot of people in elementary school. A white man or a white woman standing there telling you,
Well, only 2% of the teaching workforce is black male.
Black male.
And we're going to be doing some reporting about that, both with the Baltimore City Schools' efforts to recruit and retain black teachers. It's a specific working group that came, again, out of the grassroots. The school system did a great job about agreeing to participate, but it did come from the community, not internally from the district. But also just having some conversations with black male educators and school leaders to talk about really what the dynamic is that either keeps them out or is keeping them in education. So we'll look forward to that. And that way we have these awesome school buildings, but we also have the programming and the adults inside of those buildings being what our children need. Right? It's not enough for you. The schools will be all torn apart if you have shiny new buildings, but not quality teachers and culturally relevant curriculum and rigorous content that's preparing them for the future of work. To accompany those nice buildings.
Finally, I want to get into this piece real quick. This week, the medical examiner's office ruled Detective Sean Suter's death a suicide. Detective Sean Suter was found dead in West Baltimore neighborhood, Harlem Park, back in December 2016. He was killed.
Yeah, 2017.
No, it was 2017, and was killed the day before he was set to testify before a grand jury against the Gun Trace Task Force, who, some people may know that, they were caught up on racketeering charges, robbing citizens for money and drugs,
Robbing
and just
them. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and just a list of heinous infractions against the people of Baltimore City.
Yes.
That neighborhood was locked down after Detective Sean Suter's death, and now the controversy around it being ruled a suicide is what we're talking about this week. Stephen and Taya sat down with former police officer Neil Franklin to talk about this, and then there's also a clip from the press conference. Check this out.
When the FBI decided that they were not going to take the case, that for me said quite a bit, because if this was in any way related to the activities of the gun trace task force, the FBI was all over this.
Absolutely. And then what were you thinking as an officer, if you're going into a grand jury, that can be a trap, right? I mean, you know that you might get caught up in that, correct?
Let me tell you, we in policing know that when the feds are asking you questions about something and involve you in something, the next thing you know, you're getting a subpoena to the grand jury.
Right.
You know just the fact that if I lie about something, if I give some misinformation, I'm doing time. The feds are big on that.
Right.
You know, lying, doing an investigation, you're going to do time.
Absolutely.
He probably had some ideas as to what he was going to be asked regarding the gun trace task force and about his working with the Baltimore Police Department, knowing that anything could come up, any question can be asked. And I'll tell you something, we also know that when the feds ask you questions, they probably know the answer.
Right, they already know.
They already know the answer. So there's a lot, there had to be just so much in his mind the day before, going to testify and provide testimony. And then you've got to be thinking about, and placing myself in his shoes, you've got to be thinking about your family. You've got to be thinking about your reputation. You've got to be thinking about your kids. At the end of the day, what's going to be the best case scenario for my family?
I accept the facts as they're presented in the report. There is still more to be done, as has been indicated. The report represents additional evidence. Obviously, the police department is not going to determine the manner. That's going to be left to the medical examiner's office. I'll just leave it at that.
I want to ask one follow-up question, because the report spends quite a bit of time on the misleading of the public, as you have discussed. Have you made or planning to make significant change in how your department interacts with the public in these kinds of cases and in other cases where public information is so vital?
I've said since I've taken the job that transparency is extremely important to the department, it's important to the community, and it's important to our personnel moving forward. That credibility is critical to regaining the confidence of the public. And I think you've seen in recent times that we have made an attempt to be far more transparent, and we're going to continue to do that.
So much.
So much.
I'm really trying to find out if David Simon is writing a new series of The Wire yet, because I feel like it's
being written for him.
It would be easy, you know. This is crazy. Like,
it's crazy. It's wild.
Crazy.
Yeah.
There's so much, in the beginning, because I am suspicious of everyone.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, this is a setup. This is a cover-up, 100%.
Yeah, but now slowly it's like...
there's still so many strange and weird things that are not matching up. It's almost like it must be a conspiracy, or he absolutely killed himself, because you can't make sense of suicide.
Yeah, but I can't imagine a man who's, has a family of 5, and gets up, goes to work, puts his, outfit on, his gun, and rides to the hood and decides to kill himself in the middle of a street. Like, why not just do it somewhere? If you're going to commit suicide, do it at home, do it somewhere else. I just think that this story, it shows the high levels of corruption from the Baltimore Police Department.
Whether or not it was a suicide, I think that's definitely...
I was going to say, it also shows the high levels of stress that officers are under and first responders are under every day.
Well, and like now that it came out that it was the next day.
Well, they said that I've known that from the jump, that it was the next day, which is why I thought maybe it was a hit on him as opposed to him killing himself.
That's what I think so too.
Right.
I still think so.
I
don't believe that. I'm not buying
I
the
was
suicide.
100% before, but when I
opinion.
heard that his wife didn't know that he might be getting indicted.
Or that's what it was.
I'm like,
but you still don't.
Wait, he was going to be indicted?
The next
They were
day.
saying
He was going to be indicted.
No, he was testifying the next day. The report, somewhere in the report, I thought it said that he was going to be indicted, and he was aware.
And she didn't know.
When one of the officers testified, they said that Suter also participated in some of the activities that they were doing, so he could also be indicted. But I still don't think that gives you reason to commit suicide, though.
Well, because my understanding of the story too was that he asked to be removed from the gun trace task force, and so that his
That's true of a couple of them, though.
But his testimony could have protected him. His testimony,
he got immunity.
Yeah, he could have got immunity because of his testimony. We'll never know what his testimony was going to be. Then on top of that, the wife is saying she doesn't believe it's a suicide.
Yeah. Listen.
On top of that,
that is not verifiable evidence. My wife said I didn't kill myself.
I know, but she sleeps with that man. She knows what his mental state was like.
That's what happens with suicide.
But even more than that, the medical examiner said it was a homicide. So if the medical examiner said it was, they didn't know, they weren't sure, then I would maybe believe this case. It was ruled a homicide. He was shot behind his ear.
But this panel of third party.
Yeah. Well,
then they're saying they cleaned his hands before they tested it,
right,
so
to see if there was gunshot residue.
They didn't, so there was no good test of the
and
residue.
why was the whole community locked down for all those hours?
That's my issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like no matter
rest
what
his
the
soul,
case is.
But why did you put this community under martial law?
And you gave a whole description of a suspect, a hoodie with a white stripe, a black hoodie, a white stripe. So where did this come from?
Exactly.
It's just, and
there's so many just.
Yeah, but even more problematic for me was that the panel said that we have done other reports like this, and there were recommendations that were given that have not been followed. So that's like what? So what? Why are we having these panels? One, why are we providing these recommendations? And what
if you're not going to take action?
Yeah, exactly.
The whole thing needs to be restarted. I mean, people think this sounds so extreme, but there are other jurisdictions that have done it, and yes, sometimes they did it to wipe out pensions, which is a problem. I am in no way down for that, but it allowed them to restart their law enforcement or their police department without the same culture of slave patrols. So but the challenges is so embedded throughout all of law enforcement.
You're right.
People jump into this thinking they're going to serve their community and are quickly enveloped in the white supremacy embedded in it because that's the system. It's not that these individual people are a problem.
And changing the commissioner is not going to be the answer.
Yeah.
Like we keep changing commissioners, that's not the answer.
Commissioners who came up through the same system, so they're going to start.
Exactly. It's the culture.
Right.
Yeah. Transparency, my ass.
On that lovely happy note.
On that lovely happy note.
Freedom, I can't lose.
We want to thank you for continuing to watch the Baltimore Bureau podcast and supporting the Real News. We appreciate a lot of
news, not fake news.
Right.
Not fake news.
Hashtag Real News.
Because we are accountable to you, the people. You are the ones who fund our network. We do not take corporate funding or do any advertising. So we ask that for those of you who are donating, thank you for your donation. Those of you who haven't yet, please consider donating to the Real News Network. We are trying to bring you as real and raw news as we possibly can without any filters. So,
let me just say, we are also, you may have noticed, trying some new things here on the Baltimore Bureau podcast, having awesome guests like my sis, Ricarra. Give us some feedback when you're watching the podcast.
Yeah, we're reading all your comments.
Reading your comments, making adjustments. This
podcast
for
actually came out of a suggestion from Baltimore City viewers who came and said, this was something that they wanted us to do. So we're enjoying it, and we hope that you are as well. Thank you, Ricarra, for joining us today.
Thank you so much,
I'm so glad I could be here today.
Such a joy.
And I really, truly, truly appreciate the reporting from the Real News. You guys do not know it's always good to have such a source that's going to report on things that affect working people throughout this city and throughout this state. So appreciate all the work that you guys do.
Thank you.
Thank you. We trying.
Hold us accountable too, though.
Hold us accountable.
Yes.
You can leave us comments. You can email contact@therealnews.com and put podcast in the subject line. You could even leave specific feedback for one of us, or send an email to Ricarra and we'll pass it on to her.
Sure will. We want to thank all the people behind the scenes making this happen. My man Stephen Frank holds us down on the sound. Will Arenas is back there with the visuals. Shout out to Dave Hebden, who makes sure we got this up on the podcast and does his magic on the audio there. And then Jocelyn Dombrowski takes our pictures every week. And who am I missing? Shout out to Dwayne Gladden, who's on vacation right now.
He is not on vacation.
Oh, no, he's not. He's working. He's in Los Angeles working.
Sunny Los Angeles,
He's
California.
working in Los Angeles right now.
Adam Coley. Thank you, Adam, for holding the studio down.
Yes, thank you, Adam Coley, and all of the staff at the Real News Network. As always, we close with some Baltimore music. Y'all know how I like to do. So this week, we are going out with my man Butch Dawson and his song Liberation. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time.
Peace. Bye, Baltimore.
I liberate myself. Liberate myself. Yo. Write the best shit on some life and death shit, bitch. I'ma die a goat, yeah, that's quite an exit. Pitch and rock, watch 'em build a block like it's Tetris. In the swamps, you get trapped if you think you're headless. To my niggas on division, keep your business compressed. I be chillin', grinding to $1 million, dying for rest. I don't do drugs with my jewelry on, they on my neck. I know a lot about you niggas who be trying finesse. I pull a whip out, back seat, just rollin' a jet. I can't forget my hot Cheetos, Cheeto just copped 3 more. Stunting on you jackass dweebs, I'm going Steve-O. Now I'm dodging shade like Neo. I'm where the palm trees though. That's me on them Corona commercials. I get dome and she fertile. My blunty cup looking purple. Lifestyle shit, too many vices on my list. I take my time and evaluate my blessings and gifts. I ain't perfect, but I'm perfect to the groupies. Cause I rock the nudies. Now I'm feeling nudie. My life is like a movie. Filmed by Martin and Steven. I ain't gonna keep it even. I'm in this bitch for a reason.